Let's get comfortable. This is going to be a longer one. I want to talk about Star Trek. And in specific, I want to talk about the first 6 Star Trek movies, which comprise the original series cast. Kirk, Spock, McCoy, all those people. We're not talking about Next Generation, Picard, and all them, although they made several movies on their own. We're only going to talk about those first 6 films. And in the interest of fun, I'm also going to rank them. But I'll rank them at the end. So I'm going to talk about them and my thoughts on them, which will give hints as to where I will rank them from 1 to 6. And then at the end, I'll wrap it up with my final thoughts and by ranking them. So let's get started. First off, the way that I became familiar with the Star Trek films was when I would go and stay with my grandma and aunts and uncles. They all kind of lived in one big house in Pennsylvania. And we would go for the summers and stay with them for weeks at a time. And my Aunt Rebecca was a very big Star Trek fan. But we didn't watch the show. We only watched the movies. And I get to be... There's where the emotional connection I have to these things comes from. You'll notice that a lot of times the movies or things that we love, it's not often tied to their quality. It's tied to the emotional connection we have. And in this case, our dad would come and stay with us. And that's the only time we would see him is when we go visit with the cousins. And so we got to watch Star Trek with my dad and my aunts and uncles and cousins. So it became a very a touchstone for me and my growing up. Anyway, as I've grown older, though, I really do think there's value in Star Trek and in the original series specifically, which is my, what do the kids say? My jam? Probably not anymore. There's probably old people that say that. So, growing up, I subscribed to the now, I believe, patently false theory that the odd-numbered Star Trek films were bad and the even-numbered Star Trek movies were good. And I think this is profoundly misleading. We're not going to get into the original crew as recast by J.J. Abrams and stuff, because there's enough thoughts on that to be its own movie. But as far as this goes, we're going through Star Trek 1 through 6, original cast, and that's what we're going to stay on. So, I will talk about it. I shared a little bit about my emotional journey with these, but also what I think they have to offer on a intellectual, artistic, and any other way, what they have to offer when it comes to those things. Starting off with 1979's Star Trek The Motion Picture. This is the one film in the series that took me the longest to come around to. I saw this one a couple of times growing up, but aesthetically, I hated the uniforms. They're still not great. I don't feel near as the vitriol that I used to feel for them. But I didn't like all the aesthetics. Like I was saying, I didn't like those of the film. Also, the film, not only was it boring, people talked about it, called the motionless picture. That's the joke. That was a problem, but also I had a problem with the fact that we weren't having a good time. It wasn't Kirk and Spock and McCoy weren't joking with each other like they do, and it wasn't an adventure that we were having a good time. It was stressful, and everybody was reacting in strange ways. Spock was more Vulcan than usual, and Kirk was kind of this dark reflection of himself, and he was being a jerk, and McCoy didn't want to be there, but not in a fun way, in like a grouchy way. And so I remember that just did not connect with me when I was younger. And I have to give credit to, every once in a while, the internet does something nice. And it was people talking about Star Trek The Motion Picture on YouTube that changed my opinion of the film and got me to look at it again. The first group that talked about it was a YouTube channel called Red Letter Media, and they did a review of it where they talked about the positives of the film, the virtues of the film. And it took all those things that I thought were weaknesses and it turned them on their heads. And the last time when I did a video, I talked about Blade Runner 2049 and how I had a paradigm shift. Well, this is the only one of the Star Trek films where something like that has happened to me, where I've had an entire paradigm shift. And I also have to give credit to another YouTuber named Robert Meyer Burnett, who has excessive knowledge on Star Trek, well beyond what I could ever have. But just to give my thoughts on the film, as the film was very troubled. Star Trek the Motion Picture. It was directed by Robert Wise, famous filmmaker behind The Sound of Music and lots of other things. He'd done some science fiction, but of course never Star Trek because there hadn't been a movie before this. This movie famously only got greenlit because Star Wars was so successful. And through different issues and problems, they were constantly rewriting the script, and the movie was rushed to theaters in what many people consider to be an unfinished form. Here's my hot take. I really, really enjoy the theatrical version of this movie. Yes, a lot of the matte paintings and stuff are rushed and leave something to be desired. And a lot of the matte work is very rushed and rough and whatever else. But there is a handmade quality to that I actually really, really enjoy. You're going to find, I think there's 3 versions of this film. There's probably other ones, but I'm not aware of any beyond the 3. And thanks to the most recent restoration that was done of it and the 4K re-release, I have all 3 versions of this in 4K. You had to buy this extra fancy set to get it, and I found it secondhand on eBay for relatively reasonable. So your number 1 is your theatrical cut, which came out in 1979. And then you have what's called in the community the SLV, or the special longer version, which is basically, everything but the kitchen sink thrown in, every deleted scene that they could find. Anything that's so much so, there's even a shot of Captain Kirk floating out into space, and behind him is an unfinished scaffolding where they didn't put in the, the Enterprise. So, and it was done for television, because what they did back then, and this happened with, real quick, this happened with Superman the movie, it happened with Superman 2. I'm trying to think what else. There were several movies in the late 70s and early 80s that they would try and jam all the footage they could into it, and that way they could do 2 nights, right? And so you could have part 1, part 2, and then you've got a lot more money from advertisers and whatever else. But the benefits of this is that we have a super long version of Superman the movie, which maybe we'll talk about sometime, that I also have. And we've also got this longer version of Star Trek the Motion Picture. This version is for hardcore fans only. I really enjoy it. There's a lot of really neat stuff in there, and I won't get into the nitty gritty of it. If you want to get into the nitty gritty of it, there is a video by Red Letter Media where they go over all the differences of the 3. And then most recently, I think back in 2001 originally, Robert Wise was able to go back and recreate his, what we call the director's cut of the film, which is everything he wanted to do, plus he cut out stuff that he didn't want in there. That was only done in standard definition, and then recently, last couple of years, they were able to actually go back and do a 4K version of the director's cut. So the neat thing about that is they were able to clean up the matte paintings, do things like that Robert Wise would have wanted to do, but in a nice change of pace from like the Star Wars reboots, and not reboots, the restorations. All of the matte paintings and stuff that they did with CGI for Star Trek the Motion Picture, the director's cut, are done very tastefully. And they're done in a style that matches the current film. So, in Star Wars, you've got like when they come into Bespin at the beginning, and all of a sudden you're getting these sweeping crane shots of Bespin and all these CGI creatures, and the style of that doesn't match the style of the film at all. Not the case here. The director's cut of Star Trek the Motion Picture has very, very tasteful additions. I don't know which one's my favorite. I'll be honest, I kind of watch them on a rotation. I'm tempted to say the theatrical cut just because it's the one I first finally fell in love with, as far as when I changed my thoughts on the film. Star Trek in this film, it's the first and only time that it had grandeur, that it had awe, that brought about, that it sits comfortably next to Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and it sits comfortably next to 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's not as good as 2001, what is, but it is in the company of late 70s prestige sci-fi films. The rest of Star Trek will take different cues. They won't be part of that. And I think that's one of the things that makes those 6 films so interesting, is they are different from one another. Every film has different goals, and it shows how malleable the concept and the cast were from the original series, because you can do really successful versions of this. And I wouldn't change anything, because when you start with big prestige, heady ideas, expensive sci-fi, then you got it. Check. And then you've laid yourself a base that you can go on with other stuff. Too much talking today. Anyway, if I knew how to edit, I'd get rid of all that, but yeah, whatever. No one's watching this anyway. So, this is just kind of a exercise for me to get my thoughts out, hopefully in a coherent manner. So, as you can see, I have a lot of affection for Star Trek the Motion Picture. And I do love to watch it now. And it's the wonderful thing, the gift that I was given when I learned how to correctly see this film and to see its virtues, was that it was the only time that a Star Trek film was given to me as a present as an adult. The rest of these I loved to one degree or another as a child, but this one I never did. And this one I really, really do now. So, Star Trek the Motion Picture. At the end of the motion picture, like I said, everybody's out of sorts in the film because they've been split up and they're not living the way they're supposed to be living. And by the end of the film, we've got Kirk, Spock, and McCoy back where they need to be. Spock has re-embraced his human half. Kirk is back in command of the Enterprise. The crew's back together and they're off to have adventures. So we have gotten the hard work of bringing the crew back together, bringing the crew into the movie space, and then we're on to what most people consider to be the best Star Trek film of all time, which is Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Now, I have mixed feelings about Star Trek II. It was my favorite growing up, of course. It is still wonderful. It is a nautical adventure against an old foe, where the benefits of this are not only the adventure side of things, it's the character sides of things. These are the characters we remember from the show. And the pleasures that come from watching these characters be the best versions of themselves and go against a fantastic antagonist in Ricardo Montalban's Khan. It's great, and I understand why people think it's the best one. This one came out in 1982, arguably the greatest year in the history of movies, and it sits very comfortably next to those films, next to Road Warrior or your other nautical adventures. 2003's Master and Commander comes to mind. This is an adventure film with an antagonist, which is a really good antagonist, but we have left the grand ideas and the pace and the grandeur of the first film behind. Much lower budget this time, but that brings a lot of things into focus that are important. And so by the end of this film, spoiler alert. So yeah, you should watch all these, by the way. Spoiler alert for all of these. Spock dies at the end of this, which is a wonderful way to end the film. Defeating this enemy has a cost. There's real depth to that. There's real heartbreak to that. And he is not immediately brought back. The movie ends and Spock is still dead. And what this will do, this will launch us on a 3-movie arc that will conclude at the end of Star Trek IV. And then we'll move on to stuff. But the death of Spock has an echo for 3 films. And that's the way, if you're going to do the death of a main character, and you're going to do the kind of cheat of bringing that character back, there has to be a cost. And that's where Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, comes in. Star Trek III was the one that, for whatever reason, I think we watched the most when I was growing up. Christopher Lloyd's Klingon commander is a fun antagonist. He's not Khan, but he's a fun antagonist. Leonard Nimoy steps into the director's chair here. In fact, that's the only reason he would come back, apparently, is if he was allowed to direct the film. And the nice thing about Star Trek II, The Search for Spock, is it plays like the inverse of Star Trek II. The theme of Star Trek II is the good of the many outweighs the good of the few, or the one, that, prefaces Spock's sacrifice. The theme of Star Trek III is the good of the one outweighs the good of the many. So Star Trek II has that logical, self-sacrificing and point of view, and then Star Trek III is a very human, emotional point of view, which is what happened when Spock. That's what happens when Spock gets taken out of the picture. Is the humans and their emotions are left to run wild. And there's this wonderful moment. It's one of my favorite moments in any Star Trek film, when they can't get back to this planet where Spock's body is. So there's kind of a complicated. It's not too complicated, but Spock's essence, his soul, is in McCoy's mind, and then his body is on this planet. It's being regenerated. Anyway, point being, to rescue Spock, to bring Spock back from the dead, they have got to go get him on this planet, and it's strictly forbidden. They're not allowed to go. And so they steal the Enterprise. This is, Scotty and Sulu and Kirk and McCoy. Uhura stays behind and does some stuff too. They steal the Enterprise to go save Spock. And as they're breaking their way out of space dock, there's another ship and another captain. They're going to chase them. And the captain communicates to the bridge of the Enterprise, and you can see Kirk listening to this captain's transmission, and he says, Kirk, if you do this, you'll never sit in the captain's chair again. And without a hesitation, I love the way William Shatner does this, with no hesitation, he says, warp speed. So, doesn't matter. And the fun thing about this is one of the things I love about these 6 films, is they are true sequels. They tie back to each other. There are things that resonate from one to the other. So in Star Trek The Motion Picture, I'm just going to nerd out, so hopefully you're okay, whatever. In Star Trek The Motion Picture, there is this moment where the refit Enterprise is Kirk's being taken by Scotty on a little shuttle to go up to the Enterprise because the transporters aren't working yet. And I don't know how long it is. I think it's like 3 or 4 minutes. They fly around the Enterprise with Kirk looking at it with tears in his eyes and with Jerry Goldsmith's score going. And that is the moment that you know if you're going to love Star Trek The Motion Picture or if you should just give up on it. Because it's either the most boring thing you've ever seen or I get choked up by it now. He's seeing the Enterprise means so much to Captain Kirk. It represents so much. It represents freedom. And I don't, to put it into words is to make it vulgar. It's beyond words. It's this incredible thing. You know how much the Enterprise means to Captain Kirk just from the movies. If you watch the shows, even more. But if you just watch the movies, you get that. And so this tells you how much Spock means to Captain Kirk. He is told he will never have the Enterprise again if he does this. Zero hesitation, we're going to get Spock. And I absolutely love how the one movie echoes into another. This is also even more of a factor later on when to survive and to rescue Spock, they have to destroy the Enterprise. And there is a beautiful moment where they're on this planet watching the Enterprise burn up as it comes into the atmosphere. And Kirk's, lamenting the loss of the Enterprise. But again, he's back to business. So I love this idea that these relationships are so strong that it's worth giving up everything for. And that comes from Star Trek 3. Excuse me. My goodness. So, by the end of Star Trek 3, Spock has been brought back. He's not firing on all thrusters just yet, but there's hope at the end of Star Trek 3. So then we go on to Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home. This is a lot of people's favorite. It is one of my favorites. You'll see in the rankings later on. Star Trek 4 is a time travel comedy. I talked about how malleable this crew and this concept is. There's a giant probe coming to Earth, trying to communicate with something. They don't know what it is. It's destroying the Earth. They figure out that whales who are extinct in the future Earth have to be able to talk to this probe to save her. It's kind of complicated. It's convoluted, but it's fine. It's perfect. Point being, Kirk and Spock and McCoy and the whole crew who are now on a Klingon battle cruiser, Klingon bird of prey, have to go back in time to the 80s, which is when the film was made, and steal some humpback whales. This leads to an utterly charming 2 hours or hour 40, I don't know what it is, where you have the, the Cold War era San Francisco and the crew in just wonderfully charming, funny circumstances doing their stuff. And the great thing about this is Spock, who has just kind of come back together, is learning how to be human and Vulcan and all those things again. And so there's a lot of humor to be had from that. Point being, they bring the whales back. There's not a lot to talk about with Star Trek 4 maybe as much, but it is a wonderful experience. I love the fact that there's not really a bad guy. Whalers, I guess, in the past are the bad guys, but there's no antagonist. They're just trying to work together to solve a problem. And I do love the barbarism of the 80s compared with this idealized future. It's a lot of fun. They come back by the end of Star Trek 4. They've saved the world, and because they saved the world, a lot of the stealing the Enterprise and the things they've done wrong are forgiven. The only thing is Captain Kirk, who has become Admiral Kirk since Star Trek 2, is demoted in rank to captain, and he's made the captain of a starship again. And lo and behold, they've rebuilt the Enterprise. Now it's the NCC 1701A version, which looks just like the refit. And then they're off on new adventures. So that concludes that arc, which is basically Star Trek 2, 3, and 4, which is the death of Spock, and then the destruction of the Enterprise, and then the rebuilding of the Enterprise and bringing the crew back together. And then we have Star Trek 5, The Final Frontier, directed by William Shatner. Again, the last two were directed by Leonard Nimoy. So we've got Robert Wise. Nicholas Meyer directed Star Trek 2, who was not a Star Trek guy, but he did know a lot about Horatio Hornblower and nautical literature. And so he brought that to it. And then 3, Search for Spock, and 4, The Voyage Home, are by Leonard Nimoy. And by that time, to keep it going, William Shatner had something in his contract where he was able to convince them that he should be able to direct. And this is just run-of-the-mill Star Trek adventure. There are no big deaths. There's no whatever else. I do like the antagonist in this film. It's Spock's half-brother, Sybok. Played by, I think his actor's name is Leonard Luckenbill. Is that right? He's very interesting because he's a Vulcan that has embraced emotion, and he's on a search for God. And so you do have kind of the heady ideas of Roddenberry's original show and maybe Star Trek the motion picture, but they're a little half-baked in this. They get to the planet, they find God. God's not God. God's the devil. God's a hostile alien. Whatever. Anyway, so there are some issues with the film. One of the issues is not Jerry Goldsmith's score, which might be the best score of all 6 films. It's right up there. The special effects are atrocious. They were rushed and done by a company that doesn't normally do special effects for this big of a thing, I guess. Industrial Light and Magic was busy that year. Excuse me, my goodness. In 1989, because that was the year of Batman and Ghostbusters 2 and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, another big year. So the film doesn't go down well, and a lot of people are very disappointed with it, and we'll talk about that with the rankings later on. But we get one more bite at the apple with Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country. They bring back Nicholas Meyer from Star Trek 2. Nicholas Meyer also helped with the script of Star Trek 4, so he's dabbled in this world all up and down, and we get our final goodbye. It was known when they were making it that it was going to be the last one, which I'm really I'm glad that happened, because it feels like an elegy, like a conclusion. We're saying goodbye to these characters, and that's the strongest part of the movie, is the idea that we are saying goodbye to these characters and they're going on. We're letting them go. And in that way, it does feel like a proper coda. I also love the idea that in this, we're doing a version of Chernobyl has exploded and the Soviet Union is collapsing, and how do we navigate that, But in this case, it's the Klingons who are the Russians in this scenario. And how do we find peace when we can no longer sustain hostility? I like that idea and that message. It feels a little naive looking back, but I wish we had some of that in our world today. So it ends well. They wrap up and then they say goodbye. Those 6 films, besides 2, 3, and 4, which do feel very interconnected, especially 3 relies on the movies around it. 2 you can watch by itself. 4 you can kind of watch by itself too, but 3, but they do form one long story. Is it episodic? It is in a degree, but which is appropriate for a TV show series of movies, But it might be, it's definitely up there, but my favorite series of films. We're not including the remakes or reboots and and The Next Generation. We're just including those 6. So I love to watch them all as a group. I think they all work very well together by echoing each other. I think you find a wide variety of talent and perspectives in the films. And I think to a degree, they all work. Even the worst of them is for me watchable. So, that being said, let me pull up my list so I don't get lost or forget what I'm doing here. My ranking of the original 6 Star Trek films. Hold on, we're almost there. Okay, no surprise, the lowest, we're going to start lowest and we'll go to best. The worst Star Trek film, I think, is Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. This is pretty universally agreed upon. It is a rough film. There are some real jagged edges. Tone is a problem with Star Trek V. The humor doesn't land. It feels out of place. The characters do things that feel a little strange. Yeah, a lot of it doesn't work. However, there are moments that do work for me. There's a scene where they're on this kind of observation deck in the Enterprise, and Sybok is trying to kind of break into their minds and unlock their pain, which is kind of how he gets people on his side, by taking away their pain and unlocking it. And you see Dr. McCoy's mistakes that he's made. You see some stuff from Spock. You don't get to see Captain Kirk's pain because he rejects the idea that he shouldn't have his pain, that he says his pain makes him who he is. And I really love this whole idea. I also love the fact that when Spock is shown his pain, it's his birth and his Vulcan father rejecting him. Doesn't have any effect on Spock because Spock has dealt with this already. He's put it behind him. So it doesn't work. And we know that because of the previous films, which have dealt with the issue. A good, nice echo back. So there are moments like that are good. The camaraderie between the crew is still nice in there. But yeah, it's a rough film. Doesn't work. But I still like it. I have affection for it. Probably nostalgia. This is oh man, this number 5, Star Trek. Okay, so this is my ranking. This, if anybody who likes Star Trek, this might be controversial. Number 5 for me is Star Trek 6: The Undiscovered Country, which is considered by many to be the best Star Trek film of all time. It is miles better than Star Trek V. Don't get me wrong. It is. If you're doing it, there's a gulf, there's a chasm between my number 6 and my number 5. But Star Trek 6 for me, it is a nice ending, but I really feel the budget constraints in this one. They're trying to do things like having a Klingon gulag and whatever else. And the edges of the world really kind of pop for me. And this is so dumb, and I don't know why I'm not able to put this aside, but the whole thing kind of is a political mystery. It's almost like a murder mystery. What happened here? What happened there? But the limits of the technology they have in that era would solve that mystery instantly. The whole thing is there's a bird of prey that can fire when it's cloaked, when it's invisible. And so it sits underneath the Enterprise and shoots at another ship. And they're like, what happened? I'm like, they don't have cameras? Like, that's silly. Even if, okay, it's invisible, but then a torpedo came from nowhere. So, and then there's assassinations happening on the ship. And it's like, you don't have cameras in the hallway? I just I don't need it to not be like the story, but I need some kind of nod to and then they disabled the cameras or they scrambled this, something. I need something. Because it really does feel like we're engaging in a mystery that would work in a 60s political thriller, but it doesn't work in the far future. Anyway, those are my big issues. Those aside, I love the characters in this. I do like the fact that it does feel like a proper ending. There's a lot of fun moments in it. So yes, I've got issues that other people don't have, and that doesn't make me better. I'm just saying I can't quite put those aside. So number 5, Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country. Number 4, I've got Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, which is a really good film, but you can feel Leonard Nimoy getting his footing as a director. Again, pacing's a little bit off on this one. It ends on a strange note. It doesn't have to be a action scene at the end, but it is kind of a strange note when the audience's fatigue is really setting in. We really slow the movie down. That's interesting. But that beginning part and the destruction of the Enterprise, that's so good that it really carries the rest of the film. It's kind of like Red River. I don't know if you've seen the John Wayne movie Red River. It's like a really, really good movie that has like a strange downer, not downer, but a strange letdown of an ending. But the rest of the movie is so good it doesn't really matter. That's kind of how I feel about this. Is it's like, okay, I'm not sure what we're doing here at the last half. But that first half is so good, I'm gonna let it go. And so then we have the top three. And the top three, in their own way, I don't really have any issues with at all. The third one I have Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. It's just charming. It's just wonderful. It's just fun to spend time with. And that's the one you can show non-Star Trek people, and they seem to have a good time with it too. But the more you know the characters, the funnier it is, and the better it is. 2, I've got Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. No surprise here. Very well made movie and adventure, great characters. Yeah, I mean, it did start a really bad habit where all the new Star Trek films feel like they have to have a doomsday weapon, and they feel like they have to have action left, right, and center, which has not been great, but you can't blame it for what it spawned because of how good it is. And then my favorite Star Trek film of all time, Star Trek the Motion Picture. So to go back over it, in the 6th spot, we have Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. In the 5th spot, we have Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. I apologize. In the 4th spot, we have Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. And in the 3rd spot, we have Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. The number 2 spot goes to Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And the number 1 spot goes to Star Trek The Motion Picture, which I was able to see in the theater when they did the 4K re-release. And I took a buddy of mine who had never seen a Star Trek film. I didn't invite him. He really wanted to go. And I prepared him by saying, look, it's long. Look, it's boring. Look, whatever else. And I guess I prepared him well because he really liked it. And he liked the personality conflicts and the kind of workplace dynamic of it. So there you go. The first 6 Star Trek films, they hold a special place in my heart. Even the one I rank last, even Star Trek V, if you wanted to watch it right now, I'd go watch it with you. I enjoy all of them, not just because they're childhood favorites, although that's where it came from. I love the idea of Star Trek. Star Trek has done more to shape how I see the world than most other things, and I used to think that was kind of weird or sad, but I don't think so. I think the idea that we can put aside all of our conflicts, that we can see our differences as strengths, and that we can put all of our energies into exploration and advancement is a wonderful goal. It seems impossible, to be honest, right now with the world that we live in. Maybe it was always impossible, but doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive for that goal. So there you go. I say if you haven't seen them and you got through this whole video, that's interesting. But I think we could all use a little dose of Star Trek in our lives right now. And I prefer, even though I do like the show, I prefer the big screen versions of them because I like a little spectacle. And I like it to be in bite-sized pieces, 2 hours worth instead of seasons worth. So there you go. The original 6 Star Trek films.